Don't miss Freedom Summit Chicago 2017, Saturday, November 11th, featuring Dinesh D'Souza and Oliver North. Tickets on sale now at freedomsummitchicago.com.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So a lot to talk about. The continuing tension between President Trump and House and Senate legislative leaders against the backdrop of the need to accomplish big things like tax reform. Mnuchin this morning saying the deal on the debt ceiling, as well as the attendant relief package for Hurricane Harvey victims, clears the way for tax reform. Clears the way for tax reform. He and Chuck, Nancy, Paul, Mitch.
It's just one big happy family. I think they took their Christmas card photo yesterday, too.
Go down to Mar-a-Lago when the storm clears and hash it all out. It's going to be great.
We're going to work this out. I just love the picture, though, if you haven't seen it, of Trump and Chuck Schumer in an embrace.
Yeah, I liked Schumer more when he was the clown, when he was Pagliacci, and that's the space that he should continue to be forced to occupy. But for more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Congressman Peter Roskam, of course, a Republican representative from the western suburbs out here, Illinois 6, if you're scoring at home. Peter, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, guys. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
So do you agree with the positioning that Mnuchin offered, that debt ceiling raise, even though it wasn't what Ryan and McConnell wanted, 3 months, and the Harvey relief now clears the way for focus on tax reform, and that's something that the House is going to get its arms around?
No, I don't think it's that simple. And I don't think those things were obstacles to tax reform. The obstacles to tax reform are a sense of clarity on the conservative side about what we actually want. We've got a blueprint that we put out in the House, and it's been out for about a year, and we're really waiting for the Senate to react to that. And this is my analysis. The House is ready. The White House is ready. And the Senate, in my opinion, is dithering. They just don't seem to be hungry. There's not a sense of urgency. And so, yeah, I mean, is it helpful to have these things dealt with? Yeah, it's helpful. I don't think it's a very good deal. I think the president sort of took catnip from Pelosi and Schumer, and I think they outfoxed him. But that said, in answer to your question, I don't think that there's a relationship in the calendar between resolving these significant issues, Harvey, debt ceiling, continuing funding for the government, and fixing our tax code.
Well, so
we're moving on parallel tracks.
Okay, so on the tax code specifically, let's just stay on that track. We talked to Ed Fulner this week. We talked to Steve Moore, other free market tax reform types, and their suggestion is Paul Ryan's trying to do too much. He wants to do a full rewrite of the tax code, and that's a great thing in theory, but it's not practical. And what the House and the Senate should do is get the corporate rate as low as possible. If you can't get to 15, maybe 20. Maybe do something to lower marginal rates for middle-income families, double the standard deduction, and declare victory and move forward. What do you say to that?
So, yeah, I mean, there was a similar question that got posed to Steve Mnuchin before the Ways and Means Committee. This is a couple of months ago, and they were asking him, "Do you want permanent tax policy?" Because that's really the underlying nature of this debate. And he said, "Look, permanent is better. Doing nothing is absolutely unacceptable, and temporary is okay." Because what you're describing is basically a temporary approach. Think Bush tax cuts in 2001 and 2003 that expired after 10 years. Was it helpful? Yeah. Is it as good as it could be? Absolutely not. So my thinking is let's go for fundamental tax reform. And I think that we're at a national inflection point. And the inflection is driven by the following. Number one, nobody's defending the status quo of the tax code. Think about it. People are doing practically candlelight vigils for the Affordable Care Act, but nobody is doing that for the Internal Revenue Code. And nobody likes the IRS, which, the three of us have talked about a lot over the past year. So use that inflection and then realize that the U.S. tax code has failed to be competitive. Now, as a fallback position, do you fall back and say, okay, let's take a little bit? Yeah, of course. But let's not start there. And so we've got a bold proposal that we've rallied around the House. We need the Senate to engage on this thing.
Okay, well,
and say what you like, say what you don't like. But this game that they play over there, where they play this sort of senators. It's like this version of American Idol, where they're just judging, and they won't tell you what their proposals are. It's a real weakness in the system right now.
Why are they dragging their feet on this?
I don't know. I mean, it's a it's said that the Senate, if the Senate's a club, the House is a truck stop, and there is this real different feeling to these institutions. And I'm telling you, I think these senators are overthinking many of these questions. They're overthinking the health care debate. We had a good proposal that we moved out of the House. Again, if they didn't like our proposal, come up with what they like. In fact, this is the Republicans. Okay, come up with what you like, and then let's go to a conference committee and let's work this thing out. But we've got to repeal this pernicious law, Obamacare, that's just crushing people. Let's do it. And the culture of the Senate, in my view, Amy, is now crashing in on itself. And the culture is this. Every senator walks around, and they can procedurally, everybody can blow things up. And in the House, you got a rules committee. You can move things through the House. And in the Senate, every individual senator can basically stop things. They can put a hold on things and so forth. And now I think the culture of the Senate is crashing in on itself to the point of just dysfunction.
Well, yesterday night, I mentioned this a bit earlier, the House moved to block federal transportation and housing funding from cities and states that choose to be sanctuary cities and states like, say, Chicago, like, say, Illinois. And I know that this is not dispositive of the issue, but should the House continue to pursue this and engage the Senate and the President on this as well? It seems that's the posture of the administration at the executive branch. And even though this would be hurtful to Chicago, Cook County, the state of Illinois, don't we have it coming?
Yeah. Chicago, Cook County, and the state of Illinois have to get its act together. And the notion of acting with impunity and basically saying we're going to choose which federal laws we choose, that we're going to obey. Can you imagine the outrage if there was some state that said, you know what, that Medicaid law, we're just not going to pay any attention to it. Or, these other welfare programs, we're just not going to pay any attention to that in our state. The liberals would be outraged. The left would be fuming. They'd be marching about a federal system and so forth. And so the hypocrisy here is it's hard to overstate it. And so, yeah, it's coming. This is a fight that's coming. If you got states and jurisdictions that basically stiff arm and say we don't want to follow federal law, but we want federal money. Think about that. I think most folks in my district say that's ridiculous.
So what do you think of the new relationship budding between Chuck and Nancy and President Trump?
I don't know. I was not in the room. So I don't have a sense of sort of what the personal dynamic is. But I described this a couple of minutes ago. Basically, it's catnip. They put it out there, and I think Trump jumped for it. I think the president made a mistake. I think he's going to put a lot of pressure on himself and everybody else in December, and I think it would have been a much smarter move to break these things down and, to deal with them independently, or at least don't commingle them all and put a big jam up in December. That just never ends well.
I think Nancy Pelosi's dead eyes put him into some kind of trance, and so I think that could have hypnotized him in some way. Let me ask you about Obamacare, since you mentioned the candlelight vigils. Our friend to the north, Governor Scott Walker, who we continue to implore him to annex Illinois, he has an op-ed in Washington Examiner that states can fix the Obamacare's mess. If Congress can't lead on it, he's happy to pick up the mantle. He compares this problem to the block grants that states use for welfare reform, and states have a stable source of funding from the federal government called TANF, Temporary Aid for Needy Families, which enables them to transition from government dependence to independence through work. This was led by Midwestern governors in the 90s, including Tommy Thompson of Wisconsin, a predecessor. And so why can't we do the same thing with Obamacare? Give states like Wisconsin the resources, and Scott Walker's willing to take the responsibility. What do you say to that?
I think it's a great idea. I mean, that was the core of his argument and his proposal is at the centerpiece of the bill that moved out of the House. In other words, there was a waiver provision wherein a state can say, hey, we can do this better, faster, and cheaper, and we know what's going on the ground in our state, and they would go to Tom Price, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, lay out their plan and get a waiver. So I think that's we all have nothing but respect for what Wisconsin has done on these big core issues, and I think Governor Walker's insight is welcome and it's timely. And what it continues to do is to suggest this notion that the Senate is now playing political not it. You know what I mean? They're like, well, we've done our best. We really tried hard. We had a couple of roll calls. That's just not good enough. And now governors are speaking out. House members are speaking out. The president's been all over the United States Senate to take this thing up and get it done. Think about a jury that comes out, after they've been given a case and they tell a judge after a few hours of deliberation, well, Your Honor, we're a hung jury. We can't come to an agreement. And the judge says, you're not a hung jury. Get back in there. We're not going to try this case again, and settle down and come to a verdict. And they do, by and large. So that's what's got to happen, and continuous pressure on the Senate to perform.
All right. He is Congressman Peter Roskam, Republican from Illinois 6, out in the Western Burbs. Peter, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This only